Hello and welcome back to the LFC transfer room for another edition of Who Is. Today I'm joined by a very special guest, Adrian of Rabona TV. How are you doing today?
I'm doing very well, thank you. Doing very well. I put the red light on for you guys, so I'm of the theme today.
Yeah, red for Benfica, who are getting a nice lump sum, and red for
That's
Liverpool,
right.
who are getting a very exciting player. But obviously, we're here to talk about Darwin Nunez, Liverpool's newest number 9. Very exciting 22-year-old from Uruguay. I'll start it off by asking a very simple question. A lot of people obviously are major fanatics of the Portuguese league. I'd hesitate to guess to say a lot of people have only really seen Darwin Nunez play twice, and that was against us in the Champions League. But for someone who's never watched Darwin Nunez, how would you describe him?
Yeah, it's been interesting seeing how things have gone down, hasn't it, Charlie? Because it's one of those players that is really bringing out the ire from each side. That's either he's a complete flop, as people are painting him, or he's going to be the next world beater. But I would say that Darwin is, if you haven't watched him play before, I would describe him as a forward because he isn't necessarily an out and out striker, number 9, and he isn't necessarily a winger, although he is sort of bouncing between those two positions. And when he does start centrally, he'll still float to the left. But he's not a hold up number 9 type striker target man. He isn't like that. He's not going to drop deep and start spamming passes around and really contribute to the build up of the play. He's the guy that you want either running with the ball at his feet with lots of space to run into, or getting it behind the defenders. He's rapid. He's very tall. He's really developed his aerial ability lately, and he's a very I like I said, I hesitate to call him a striker. I hesitate to call him a winger. He's somewhere in between type of thing, but he is very raw is what I will say. And as I'm sure we'll talk about here, he has some things that he'll need to have ironed out by Klopp. But he certainly seems like he has a very, very high ceiling, very high potential. And he looks like he's a player that's very much willing to listen to what his managers are saying to him, listening to feedback and getting him to really work on his game and put those hours in training to really improve upon his game.
Yeah, there was obviously reports before we signed him that Jurgen Klopp was heavily pushing for this transfer, and we know that he's not a fan of spending money when he doesn't have to. Obviously, Klopp really rates him. He spoke about him in press conferences before and after, and we played against Benfica. It seems like Jurgen Klopp is going to be getting into a new era of his attack. Obviously, Sadio Mane is on his way to Bayern Munich. We've never really played with an out-and-out striker. How do you think Klopp can develop his overall game? And as you said, obviously Nunez has been looking forward to working with Klopp, so he's going to be taking on everything on board that the German says, hopefully.
Yeah, I think that the areas where he needs the most sort of refining would definitely be in his passing, because people always bring up his passing percentage as being pretty low. And honestly, when I look at that, I think, okay, well, where is he making these passes? What would contribute to it being so low? And a lot of the time, it's those quick sort of interplay around the box where those get broken up by defenders either way. He's not really, making these long or medium range passes from the midfield to other players. He's always running with the ball or running onto the ball. And so those passes are typically in the final third, I would guess. So that's something that he definitely needs to work on some more. He definitely needs to work on his hold-up play if he is to be played as a typical sort of number 9, as people are sort of musing that Klopp wants to use him, or at least to have that sort of option, something different in the attack. He really needs to work on his hold-up play. That's not to say that he won't surprise you now and then and he'll do well to hold off a defender, because he is a big, strong player. But it's the control and the incorporating his teammates around him that he needs to work on a little bit more. So I'd say that those are the two major things that Klopp will need to work on with him, is his passing and his hold-up play, if he is to be employed in that way. Because that's the interesting thing, is how will Klopp end up using him? Will he use him in a similar way to Benfica did, where he would sort of play either as a second striker or as the out-and-out striker, but constantly shifting to the left? But then he's getting into Luis Diaz territory. So there's a lot of figuring out to do, Charlie. So I'm fascinated to see what Klopp's going to end up doing, because it could go, a bunch of different ways. And like I said, with Darwin, he is very receptive to feedback. He is very receptive to new orders, being told to play a little bit of a different way. Just how he would adapt to being that solitary striker playing in the middle and bouncing passes off of him. I think that would require a lot of patience in order to see him excel in that role, because it's not something that he's doing currently.
100%. I mean, there's been a lot of talk as well. I mean, your average Premier League fan likes to say the Premier League's the best league in the world. It's definitely up there to a much tougher league compared to some European leagues. The physicalities on a different level, the intensities on a different level. I mean, with Erling Haaland joining as well, there's been a lot of talk around Nunez and how maybe, especially the pair, how are they going to be able to adapt to the Premier League? Do you think Nunez's attributes will allow him to maybe settle into the Premier League a bit easier than other forwards?
Potentially, just because, it's always a bonus when you have the physical side of things, when you have that speed. And I wouldn't say that he's the most explosive over a short distance, by the way. It's mostly, once he gets up to his top speed, there's no stopping him. But he has that. And then he also has the size. And he's also improved a lot, as I was saying, with his aerial ability as well. We saw him sort of become a threat from set pieces. We saw him become a threat sort of ghosting into the back post for headers, that kind of thing. So I think that he does definitely have the attributes to sort of adapt quicker than maybe some other forwards would in the Premier League. And it's something that I'm interested in seeing is if he will play centrally, because he likes to float to the left to that back post, if that's going to be a link up between himself and Trent Alexander-Arnold quite often, that's what I would assume will happen a bit more, because he likes to float into that back position. So yeah, I think that it's funny, both of these strikers that have been signed, people like to talk about, they're so injury prone, both with Haaland and Nunez. With Nunez, I feel like it's overblown a little bit, because it's not a player that when I think to his time at Benfica, I think, oh, all those matches that he missed, I don't really think of him in that way. He has had a couple of injuries, but he dealt with his surgery over the last summer, and then he was pretty good for the rest of the season as well. So that sort of physical aspect, which is another thing people like to bring up when players that come into the Premier League, that it's a lot harder on them. I don't know that will necessarily be a huge issue. At least I hope not. I mean, who can say for sure, right? But a lot of people like to point to his injury record, the fact that he had that ACL injury when he was still pretty young. It hasn't really been that much of a recurring issue that at least has affected his playing time that much, because of course, as I said, he got that surgery last summer. But yeah, I'm going off on a tangent here, but I think ultimately he will develop, or at least get used to the Premier League relatively quickly, because he is blessed with those physical attributes that we went over.
Yeah, I mean, I was going to mention as well, we've obviously seen a lot of Premier League players adapt extremely quickly. Ruben Diaz, Luis Diaz, Cristiano Ronaldo when he first joined, Bruno Fernandes, they're just the ones off the top of my head. So it seems like it's a league that adapts, maybe not as much as the Bundesliga have we've seen in the Premier League. But obviously, the one main talking point that a lot of opposition fans are talking about is the price tag. Obviously, 100 million euros, it's being spouted as that because, an agenda, and no one wants to say 100 million pounds because it makes it look less. Maybe I'm going off my Liverpool bias there, but at the end of the day, it's a big price tag for a 22-year-old. There's no denying that at all. How do you think he'll be able to justify his price tag? Obviously, we can't see into the future, but he signed a 6-year contract at Liverpool, which is good news. He means he's, obviously happy with the project that Liverpool have laid out to him. But obviously, there's still a lot of question marks around that price tag, isn't there?
There's, and rightfully so, because I mean, the prices are just getting ridiculous, especially for youngsters that are, let's be real. I still think that Darwin is relatively unproven. And what I mean by that is this season, he vastly overperformed on his expected goals. Well, not vastly, but in the league, for example, he had an expected goals of 18 and he ended up scoring 25. But he doesn't really have a precedent of doing that before with Benfica. And so when things like that happen, when a player has a sort of, let's call it a breakout season, goal scoring wise, it gives me just a little bit of pause and it causes me a bit of hesitation. Like, okay, let's see if you can do it again next season and then we'll be talking. So that is one thing that I think I look at the price tag in correlation with that and I get a little bit nervous. But then, let's give some context here on that price. In April, he fired his agent and went with Jorge Mendes. So immediately right there's a massive agent fee boom. Also, Jorge Mendes is the master of driving up fees. He works with Benfica all the time. Benfica always gets great fees for a lot of their youngsters, unless we let some of them slip away. But we always get great fees for a lot of our youngsters. That happens all the time. So there's the agent fees. Plus, Benfica was driving up the price because Almeria was going to get a significant percentage as well. So there's all these little sort of contributing factors that are just driving that up and up and up. And I mean, look, if I was to look at that in isolation and say 100 million for Darwin Nunez, like, come on. This, like I said, he needs to prove himself a little bit more, and then we can start talking about a price tag like that. But then lately, have we really had many reasons to doubt Liverpool's scouting department? I feel like they do their due diligence, and with Klopp in particular, he's one of those managers where when he wants a certain attacker, I believe in that attacker even more so. And having watched Darwin, and like I said, he has that willingness to work hard. He puts the graft in. He's so determined because of his backstory. I'm sure you guys have gone through that on the channel as well. You know, growing up in Uruguay, his family struggled. His brother quit so that Darwin could continue playing, etc., etc. He just seems to have the sort of backstory that Klopp kind of likes. I don't know if this is just, I'm just doing lazy analysis here, but there's sort of a trend in the kind of players and their backstories, etc., that end up doing well at Liverpool. And so he has the personality for it. And like I said, he has that ceiling and he has a lot of potential to grow into. So I feel optimistic that, yes, right now we're going to be talking about this price tag. And I think that it could take a full season until you start to really see Darwin playing incredibly well in that attack. But I am optimistic that he'll eventually, be vindicated, Klopp that is, for wanting to go for this striker so aggressively.
Yeah, I mean, as you said, no, we haven't really had any attackers at Liverpool fail. And as you brought up there, Jurgen Klopp and his team do seem to go after maybe players who weren't brought up in the nicest of households or areas. And, maybe they've got a little bit of extra motivation, as we can say. But going more onto the Benfica side, I don't think we've really heard too much from the Benfica fans in particular. But how are they feeling about the price tag? Obviously, they sold João Felix for a crazy amount, and a few seasons later now they're losing Darwin Nunez as well. Is that just sort of how the club is run? They build up the players and then they sell, and the fans just have to deal with it.
Yeah, of course. It's something that we're very, very, very much used to at this point, whether it's our academy players leaving after, one season of success. It's signings that we get from South America, the same sort of deal. And part of it is because of, and this is a long thing that I'll try to condense, is that relationship that Benfica has with Jorge Mendes, for better or for worse. It's for the better because you get these massive fees coming in from the players that we sell. There was a lot of questions of where that money was going for a while with our previous president, etc. But then at the same time, yes, you're getting that money in, but you're constantly in this state of rebuilding. You're constantly breaking everything down, having to bring in new players that aren't quite ready to step into a full starting 11 role all the time. It's really frustrating, but it's decades of this, Charlie. It's decades of this. I don't know how many times I've seen the different, if Benfica kept all of these players, they would have been Champions League winners. And it's probably true, but it's just with the reality of the Portuguese league, it's not as competitive. Players want to use it almost as a stepping stone. They see Benfica now as a great place to develop and then get that big move to another club, as Darwin has, João Felix, etc. So yeah, it's frustrating, but with Darwin in particular and how the Benfica supporters are feeling about him moving on, there's some that are, and players always have this, even with their own supporters, they can be divisive. And some see Darwin as, they only see it when he miscontrols the ball, or they only see the mistakes, basically. There's a lot of glass half empty sort of supporters when it comes to Darwin. But I think for the most part, a lot of us are, we believe that he would have been a very important player for us once again next season, probably would have scored around the same amount. But when you look at the fee coming in, when you look at how that could be reinvested, and we have a new presidency, and it looks like things were sort of turning the corner a little bit as far as running the football club well and how those funds could be used. I think some are sad to see him go, but ultimately optimistic that we'll find another talent that will be able to develop and ultimately sell to another rich club in Europe.
Yeah, I'm sure the 100 mil will definitely help with that search. One thing I do want to ask, though, I mean, obviously is Uruguayan. They're not short of great strikers, Uruguay,
Hmm.
obviously. The main two being Luis Suarez and Edison Cavani. I've seen a few people, mainly people from Uruguay, have described them as a mix between the both. He's extremely fast, which for a 6'2" striker you wouldn't expect. I think he was the second fastest in the Champions League next season. Would that be a fair comparison to make, a mixture between Suarez and Cavani? Obviously, they're both very different players, but they both are great at what they do.
I can understand that because some like to say that Uruguayan strikers have similar sort of attributes, basically in how hard they work, which I think could be true of both Cavani and Luis Suarez. And I can see aspects of maybe both. Maybe Darwin's dribbling ability is closer to that of Luis Suarez, definitely more unorthodox and a little bit clumsier to watch. That's another thing about him, is that I often find that he looks worse than he's actually playing, just because he's sort of unorthodox and he's really lanky, and he's not as smooth as other players. So I would say that he has a bit of, maybe the speed and the dribbling that Luis Suarez would at least do, or Darwin is attempting to do, but he has the height and sort of the lankiness of a Cavani. And to be fair to him, Darwin is getting a lot better at how he arrives in the box to get on the back of cutbacks, the crosses to the back post, etc. So I can see little aspects of both, but having watched Darwin and having watched Cavani at length, I don't necessarily see the correlation, or the similarities, I should say. They're not as obvious. It's, yes, he has a bit of dribbling from Suarez, maybe. Yes, he has a bit of the height and the movement or something of Cavani. It's a pretty big reach, I should say.
Yeah, I mean, if he can have the career of either of those at Liverpool, I'm sure a lot of people will be happy. But finally, obviously, he scored 32 goals for Benfica this season. He's, as you said, he's good in the air. I think he scored 6 goals from headers this summer, and quite. I think that might have been the most in the Premier League if he scored them in the Premier League. But obviously, Trent, Andy Robertson, both very good deliverers of the ball, probably the best fullbacks in the world, some may argue. With their delivery and, with how Liverpool play, maybe they cater their attack more around him. If you could give an early season prediction, how many goals do you think he would score next season?
Premier League or all competitions?
Let's say all competitions.
All competitions, okay, because I think he'll probably get some, Minamino minutes in the cup, something like that. So I think if all goes really well, first season goals, I would say between 12 and 15, maybe. I don't know if that's a stretch. Get some in the league, some in the cup, a few here, a few there. Maybe let's say 10 to 13. I'm going to go 10 to 13 because I really do think that this is a player you need to be patient with, and that Klopp, I was reading something about, I recently read Klopp's book and how he handles attackers and how he handles signings. And he really takes his time with them. And you guys saw that even with Konate. I think Konate wasn't really starting regularly until maybe 5-6 months into the season last season, correct? So I think that it's someone that you're really going to need to be patient with. And it's also could lead to a system change for Liverpool. So just in general, it could be a little, not a complete system change, but a bit of a different how they approach the attack. So it could be a lot of everyone sort of getting used to each other. So I would say somewhere between 10 to 13 goals in his first season. And maybe we'll see those assist numbers go up as they did in his first season at Benfica, when he was a little bit nervous on the ball, lacking confidence, but in his second season was just full of confidence and taking those opportunities himself.
Yeah, I think I put you on the spot there. I mean, it's you never know. We could have a Mohamed Salah first season and break the Premier League record for goals. I mean, I'm sure Liverpool fans would absolutely love that.
Yeah.
But I think that is all. Adrian, thank you so much for joining. I'm sure everyone knows who you are, but where can you check out your videos and stuff like that?
Yeah, thanks for having me. This was a pleasure. And just search Rabona TV on YouTube. And then, as you can see on my little name tag there, that's my Twitter handle if you wanted to follow me and get at me on there. But yeah, it was a pleasure as always. And hopefully Darwin turns out right for you guys.
Hopefully. Thank you so much for joining us. Some great content on his channel. I definitely encourage you to go and check it out. But I've been Charlie, and thank you for joining us for today's video.